There is something so disturbing about watching someone try to build themselves in real time. It is not improving themselves, it's not adjusting what they have, but instead trying to build a whole new identity. Now, Braden Peters, also known as Clavicular, did not just enter the internet as a normal streamer. What he did was construct a version of himself inside of it. He constructed a body and a persona and a language, and everything about his movement is deliberate, even the extremities. At 14, he was injecting testosterone in himself and hiding it from his parents and already trying to reshape himself at a chemical level before his puberty had even finished yet. It wasn't for health and it wasn't for sport and it wasn't to excel at something. It was simply for perception. Later, it escalated. The idea of looks maxing, the idea that appearance is not something you inherit, but instead something that you engineer. Surgery, starvation, bone manipulation, literally smashing his own jaw with a big ball, a metal ball, just so his bone would come back in a different shape. And there's something a bit philosophical about that. It sounds a bit pretentious for me to say that, but it is the idea of refusing to accept what is given to you. The belief that the self is not something that you discover, but instead something that you impose upon yourself. Now, the famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote something similar long before any of this looks maxing existed. You must become who you are. But Nietzsche meant something much more precise, not self-expression in the sense that you have to look good, not aesthetics, but instead the act of shaping your own values against the world that hands them to you. Now, Clavicular took that idea and instead collapsed it into his body. Not values, not morals, not ethics, but instead bone. And not meaning, but instead appearance. And that is where that distortion, as well as the parallel between the two begins. Because Friedrich Nietzsche did not end with clarity. His life did not end with a conclusion. It ended with a collapse. In 1889, he walked into a street in Turin and saw a horse being beaten and broke. He wrapped his arms around it, and then silence and then permanence, and the mind that wrote about strength and self-overcoming completely disappeared just because he saw that. The work remained, but Friedrich Nietzsche did not control his own work anymore. His sister edited it and reshaped it and redefined it into something completely different from what it was. Ideas were taken out of context and used by people he would never have aligned with. He lost the authorship of himself, and that is the parallel between the two. Clavicular does not exist as a person in the way that people think. He exists as a feedback loop. He streams everything, he escalates everything, and at one point he live streamed himself hitting someone with a fucking Cybertruck, an event that immediately spread around the news and everywhere, regardless of the context. It doesn't matter what actually happened. What matters is that it became content. It made him famous. A lot of people looked him up simply because they saw the news articles about him. And then that becomes identity. It becomes the only thing that people see about him. He gets arrested, he gets banned, and he gets invited to a fashion week. The algorithm does not care whether the trajectory makes sense at all. It just continues. It just makes him more and more famous. And that is the structure that both of them ended up inside. Nietzsche built a philosophy about becoming, and then became something he could not control. Clavicular built a body and a persona and a presence, but then became something that the internet would not let him stop being. That is the real absurdity. That is the distinction between the two, which is also somehow the connection between the two. It is not that either of them were extreme, but simply because the system rewards the extremity and then removes the ability to step outside of the extremity. He makes over 100,000 a month. I saw a video of him making 20k per stream, and he streams almost every day on a platform that thrives on minimal moderation. Literally as little moderation as possible. Kick. It's not despite the behavior, but simply because of the behavior. It's the exact same way that Nietzsche's ideas spread, not because they were understood, but simply because they were powerful enough to be misused. Both of them lost control of what they started, one through illness and the other one through amplification. That is the distinction. I'll make it clear now. That is the distinction between the two. The most uncomfortable part, however, about the whole thing is that neither of them would fully recognize what they became. Nietzsche never saw his name turn into a symbol detached from his writing, and Clavicular is still inside of it, but the direction is already set. The escalation must continue now. He has to continue going or else he loses all his clout, and then all his building and all this bone smashing and all this injecting is all for nothing to him. The persona has to hold up, because stopping would again mean confronting something already underneath everything. It would be like taking off the blanket, ripping the band-aid. It was a self that was never built. It was simply performed, and that is the connection. Just it. That's it. It's not morality. There's no politics between the two. There's no even philosophical ideas. It is simply structure. It is the structure between what happens when a person treats themselves as something to construct, as something to build upon, and then pushes it far enough that it starts actually working, but then realizes far too late that they are no longer the one deciding what it becomes.